Hi everybody, my name is Sara Cushing and I'm going to be talking to you today about using the arts to promote assessment literacy. I really hope I don't have to use this recording and I can bring this to you live, but I was asked to record this just in case. So, just before I start, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm from Georgia State University. That is this downtown Atlanta campus. My office is somewhere on the 15th floor of this building. And this is me in a workshop in the before time when I was able to travel. So I've done a lot of work around assessments, but in other parts of my life, I also have been singing in choirs my whole life and dabble a little bit in art, especially during the pandemic. So this is a little bird that I painted when I was working on watercolor. So you might come to this talk thinking the arts are a luxury. Change my mind, and we'll see if I can do that in this talk. I want to start with a quote from a paper by Lawrence 2005, which is about incorporating the arts into adult education. And she says, cognitive knowing has dominated the adult education classroom, where the curriculum typically emphasizes transmission of knowledge through cultural reproduction. When we open up intellectual space to incorporate other ways of knowing into our teaching practice, as expressed through metaphor, dance, poetry, visual art, or dramatic expression, we draw on the affective, somatic, and spiritual domains. If we insist that people put their ideas into words, what gets communicated is often partial or not expressed at all. Now, this sounds like kind of humanities education. What does this have to do with language testing? Well, if we think about language testing, I think one of the really critical things to always remember is that language testing is a very human endeavor, and our tests are used to make decisions that will affect the lives of students. So I think it really is very important to maintain that emphasis and focus on our own humanity and the humanity of the people who are taking our tests. With that introduction, I'm going to give you just a quick outline of what I'm going to be talking about. First, just briefly about language assessment literacy. Why is it important? And then a few lenses. This is the more theoretical part of why should we consider using the arts in our teaching and learning. And we have some insights from learning science, from what's called andragogy, some of the benefits of an arts integrated curriculum, also multimodal composing. So I'm just going to talk some about those kind of theoretical lenses. And then I'm going to just walk through some examples from my testing class and workshops. So that's the fun part. And then finally, I have a few caveats and some final thoughts to share with you. All right, so if you've read any language testing journals over the last 2 decades, you will read a lot about language assessment literacy and how important it is. So here's a quote from Taylor 2009. An appropriate level of assessment literacy needs to be nurtured, not just among engineers and technicians who are actively involved in test development or research activities, or even among applied linguists and language teachers involved in delivering language education, but much more broadly in the public domain if a better understanding of the function and values of assessment tools and their outcomes are to be realized across society. So yes, we need to promote assessment literacy. And more recently, Digers and Malone 2019, language testing experts have emphasized the need for increased language assessment literacy among SCORE users. Vote et al. 2020, language teachers report to have received little training considering their multifaceted tasks that are related to assessment in the EFL classroom. So these quotes just show that, yes, we all agree there's a need for language assessment literacy. How can we promote it? Well, I would say one of the things we can do is in our language testing courses, some ways of engaging students around this issue and helping to teach them to communicate these things further. So one thing that I think, the simplest thing, and I think we all know this, is the importance of using visuals in addition to words. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So that's just very basic, and we all use visuals. The more experience we get at giving talks, the fewer words and the more pictures we use on our slides, I think. And this slide, here's some 6 things that show the power of visuals. That first, it takes us to the essence of whatever the thing is we're talking about. It provides a common language. It can make complex issues understandable, stimulates engagement, participation, improves system thinking, and it's a good way to create memory. So that's pretty basic. I think we all can kind of agree on that. Next, but I want to give you a good example or a couple of examples from language testing. So going back to assessment literacy, we talked about it a lot, but it wasn't until Taylor published her famous spider webs in 2013, and that really has promoted a lot more research and talk, because we now have these sort of nice visuals about different profiles for 4 different kinds of stakeholders. And Linda will tell you that this was never meant to be, this is just sort of her ideas, not really anything empirical or falsifiable, but this has generated a lot of interest. And this shows you the power of a good visual to spark some conversation, get people thinking. Now I'm going to give you another example that's very relevant to recent events. So a year ago, when everything suddenly had to go online, one of the issues was, our students can't take the TOEFL or IELTS. So what about this new test? Well, the Duolingo, people can take it at home, it's online. What do you think about it? Well, if you look at this table of numbers, you'll see, well, if our TOEFL score is somewhere around 79 or 80, that just means 46 to 50. Okay, so we'll just set one thing that we can do is we can just say, okay, we'll look at this table and we will set our score to be 46. All right, now I'm going to show you the visual that goes along with this. Here is the scatter plot that goes along with this report. And you will notice that there is definitely a positive correlation, but there's also this area here. There seems to be a few people who score below, say, 35, but not very many. There seems to be sort of a floor. And now if we take this 46 to 50 and we put that here, we highlight that area 46 to 50 and look at the TOEFL scores, it looks like people who scored between 46 and 50 on Duolingo scored between 60 and 110. So what are the consequences of setting our cutoff score here? Well, we could tell our admissions office all about concordances and things like that, but showing them this chart is much better. So for example, look at all these people who got higher scores on the TOEFL that would not be admitted if we chose this cutoff. Look at all those people with higher scores who got very low scores on the TOEFL. So what I would say to someone who asked me, I said, well, if you're really serious and you're really comfortable with this TOEFL and you want to make sure that you are admitting people who have at least that much proficiency, You might set your cutoff here around 73. And this is much easier to explain with a visual than it is just in words. So that's just a little bit about visuals. I want to talk about the notion of andragogy, which you may or may not be familiar with, but this is the art and science of teaching adult learners as opposed to pedagogy. Peda is child, andra, man. Of course, it could be gynagogy, I guess would be women, but we will leave that bit alone. And this is associated with the work of Knowles in particular. And what Knowles is about is, what do we know about adult learners that's sort of different from children? And there's several things he talked about. First, the adult self-concept. Adult learners are self-directed, autonomous, and independent, as compared with, say, young children who need a lot more direction and are less autonomous. The role of experience. So an adult has a lot of experience that can be used for learning. And adults just have that experience, and they tend to learn by drawing from their previous experiences. So the more we can connect our teaching to their previous experiences, the more engaging it will be. Readiness to learn. Adults tend to be ready to learn what they believe they need to know, as opposed to kids that go to school and they learn or they don't learn what their teachers, they're a little more likely to just be told this is what you have to learn and to try to learn it. Orientation to learning. So adults learn for immediate applications rather than for future uses. When you study calculus, if you study calculus in high school, you have no idea what it's useful for. It's only when you're an engineer or a computer scientist or something, suddenly, oh, this does have some applicability. Or I never really understood European history when I studied in high school until I lived in Central Europe for a couple of years. So adults learn for their immediate applications. Their learning orientation is problem-centered, task-oriented, and life-focused. And internal motivation, they are more internally motivated than externally. And finally, adults need to know the value of learning and why they need to learn. So all of these sort of principles can feed into our teaching philosophy and argue for teaching that is learner-centered, that allows students to be autonomous, to meet their own goals, that kind of thing. Oops. All right, so arts-based learning. This is summarized from an article. There's a whole literature on this, but this is from an article that happens to be in the field of nursing. So arts-based learning uses art to support knowledge development in non-art fields. So it involves active learning fostered through participating in or reflectively examining art, where students actively participate and are constructors of knowledge. And studies in using arts-based learning in nursing, it increased student engagement and enhanced empathy, self and cultural awareness, and observational skills. And it's been used in lots of other fields too. I happened across this article a couple of years ago from the University of Chicago. This is a picture of, this is actually in the business school in a leadership workshop where instead of talking about principles of leadership, they taught them all to sing together, and they were able to draw some leadership principles out of choral singing. So this is just an example of the kind of thing that arts-based education can be valuable for. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about multimodal composition, because this is a really big thing in the world of rhetoric and composition. And it's relevant to arts-based education, because it's really thinking about not just words, but all the ways that we communicate. So literacy researchers have explored the notion of multimodality, which is the mixture of communicative modes such as audio, video, images, or gesture, the way these modes interact. It has gained increased attention as the ubiquity of digital technologies and changing social practices impact the way in which literacy functions in the 21st century. It's not just a textual feature, but as part of a group of social practices characterized by a new ethos, collaboration, decentralized, and discursive participation. So this kind of complements the things that I've talked about in terms of andragogy and arts-based learning. All right, so in thinking about all these things are the questions I've kind of been asking myself over the last several years. How can I incorporate the arts in teaching concepts in language testing? What assignments can I give that will promote creative expression and help my students have all of these benefits? And then, how can I prepare students to be able to communicate with a wide variety of stakeholders with varying levels of knowledge about and interest in language assessments? So it's sort of teaching, learning, and communication. So I've been kind of experimenting these things. At the end of this talk, I hope that you will be willing to share your ideas in these areas. So I'm just going to go through a few examples. The first one is just using visuals to spark discussion. And the first day of my language testing class, I gave students a whole bunch of pictures. These are just a few of them, and said, pick a picture and that says assessment to you and tell us why. So you can imagine that people picked this picture because tests just keep us away from what we want, or it's a path towards learning, or this is the proctor and these are the people taking the test. But I got a really interesting response from one student who chose this picture, which I happened to take in New Zealand a couple of years ago. And she talked about the rainbow being sort of the promise of assessment, really helping students with their learning. And the cow is our trusting student, expecting us to do a good job with assessment. I loved that image, and it was so delightful. I never would have made that connection, and I really got to know something about that student in that. So this is just a nice kind of icebreaker activity. Now, we all know that music, like visual, can be a mnemonic. I am not a composer, but fortunately other people are. So this is just an example. I don't have time to play the video for you, but you can look for it yourself. There's the link here. One of these concepts we have to teach is the standard error of measure, and here's the formula for it. But this fellow, Keith Sanford, who has a whole bunch of these, he has put together these short videos. It's kind of blues. If you test me many times, my scores will change and stray from true. And then the standard error of measure says just how far they do. I can't remember. It's something like that. He does that several times. But it's simple, it's catchy, and it goes down to the basics of what the standard error of measure. So I like finding these things and using them. I wish I could make them myself. I can't, but they are kind of fun. So my next example is a concept map, and I just realized I don't have the picture that I'm supposed to have here, but hopefully I'll have the picture if I get to do this live tomorrow. So this is the famous Sam Messick quote, and from 1989 that everybody has embroidered on a pillow in their home. And what I've had students do is take these words, validity, judgment, evidence, rationale, adequacy, appropriateness, inferences, actions, test scores, modes of assessment, and make a concept map. How do these words fit together? Because if you just read this, you won't really, you'll just sort of read it and you'll forget it. But if you really struggle with how do these concepts fit together, you can you can get a deeper knowledge of this. And I will have some, hopefully, as I say, an actual picture that's supposed to go with this slide. Metaphor, visuals are really good for metaphors. So these are sort of the four, we all want to tell our students reliability, practicality, washback, some variation of this. And there are different ways of describing these concepts visually, but I like to do it as a scale because we want all these good things, but we have to balance them with practicality. And another thing I like to do with this is I put students in groups and I say, I want you to come up with an animal that represents these qualities. And then we vote on them. And typically, classes will say that the dog represents reliability because our dogs are so consistent. This one group thought of the eagle for validity because the eagle can spot a target from far away and hone in right on it. Practicality is represented by the humble spider who can catch her own food just using the resources she has. And then for washback, the chameleon, which changes color based on its background. So then once students have decided on these, then I can use these images or icons whenever we're talking about these test qualities later. It's a way to help them remember. All right, role play. So drama is another art. I was introduced to the clapping contest at a conference I was at, which teaches the importance of scoring rubrics through experiential learning. And I wish I had time to give you a demonstration, but essentially you send 3 people out of the room and you set up the scene with everybody else. The first person comes in. When I did this, I was of course one of the volunteers and I was the first one to come in. And the teacher gave me this big build up and said, "Welcome to the World Championship of Clapping." And I had to do a clapping performance. So I applauded and the judges rated me. And the teacher asked what the criteria were, and the judges said, well, we were looking for enthusiasm, we were looking for our range, and she wrote down a few words. So then when the next person came in, they did the same kind of build up, but the second person was told, and the judges are looking for volume, they're looking for range. And so the second person was able to perform much better, and so on. And I've used this in my teaching. Students really love it. They learn a lot about the importance of knowing the criteria on which you will be evaluated. So that's another example of kind of an artsy thing I've incorporated into my class. Now, moving on to assignments I've given. We happen to be using Tony Green's book, and just has this one page, the acronym PRICE, Planning and Reflection Lead to Improvement when supported by cooperation and informed by evidence. And this might be just sort of a throwaway thing, but I thought, you know what? This looks like it would be a great inspirational poster for our testing office. So I've asked people to, just as an assignment, as a group project or by yourself, make a poster that we can hang in our testing office. Creative. So here's one example. Property Brothers Assessments. These are my students, and they've got building the right house of assessment at the right price, and they've got all the price qualities here. Here are a couple more. We've got one that's hand-drawn. Don't forget to check the price. She worked really hard on this. This is Test Our Us. I love it. And then we have the, of course, the Price is Right. Now, some people don't want to do, they don't feel like doing, so they maybe they'll write poetry. So I said, that's fine. So here's, this student said, well, I made a poster, but I didn't like it. So I wrote this poem. When assessment season comes, teachers just can't sit around and be bums. Planning is a must in any project. Without it, it becomes a reject, etc. So she wrote a poem. This student actually, she gave me the video of the French Prince of Bel-Air because I wasn't familiar with it. And she wrote a parody, and it was beautiful. It was excellent. And students really love this because they have fun doing it. It gets them involved. It gets them engaged. And I love grading them. It's much better than a paper. The most amazing thing, if I have a chance later, I can play this for you. I had 4 students who put together an entire music video where they took a song from the movie Mulan, and after it was all scripted, it was fabulous. Another activity I have, so when students have to do presentations, one of my typical assignments, one of the big projects in the class, is they have to review a published test. Ordinarily, I would say, well, you're going to make a 10-minute presentation of the class and write a paper. And so there's a couple of days of class where we have sort of death by PowerPoint, where all the groups are giving their 10-minute presentations. And so a couple of years ago, I just decided to shake it up a little bit and said, well, you know, you can do that. You can make a PowerPoint presentation of the class, or you can do something else. You can make a video, you can write a screenplay, a podcast, a poster, infographic. Just go wild. It just still has to cover reliability, validity, and things. So there's the principal and the teacher and so the interior school administrative office mid-afternoon. They've got the whole, I don't know that much about screenplays, but it describes the scene and knock on the door. And then the teacher explains the situation. We have 4 new students joining us this semester, immigrants. The principal says, how's that my problem? And the teacher goes on to explain why he wants to use this bilingual verbal ability test. And he goes into every single aspect of test usefulness. It's clever, it's fun, and everybody learned a lot from it. So those are just some examples. What do students say? I had a student who made a poster and said, well, when I was coloring it, I had time to think deeply about the ideas. Another student who I said, well, why do you think I'm asking you to do these things? And she said something, and these are paraphrases, we're going to have to learn how to communicate about tests to people who aren't in our field, so I'm glad we did these activities. Some of the challenges of doing this sort of thing, just time and prioritization. We have so much to teach. It's easy to kind of do things the way we've always done them. So just, that's always a challenge. There can be resistance from teachers and students, especially we get this idea, I don't, art is for kids. I don't do it, I'm not any good. So that's going to be an issue. In terms of like producing videos and things like that, we think students are digital natives, but they aren't necessarily as technologically savvy as we think they are. Sometimes, students think, and this comes from the multimodal composition world, that you want students to make a commercial or make something like this, and they sometimes have challenges conceptualizing a non-academic audience. So it tends to be a little less, it can be less rigorous than an academic paper. And then how do we assess these things? There's sometimes a tendency to rely on traditional forms of assessment. So, well, I'm not going to grade you on your great screenplay, but I'm just going to grade the paper that you wrote. So that's something that we have to think about. And I'd love to get your thoughts on these things. So anyway, just going back to Lawrence 2005, incorporating various art forms, poetry, drama, music, literature, visual arts, and others into the practice of adult education provides tremendous potential to enhance both teaching and learning. For these learning opportunities to occur, educators need to take risks by venturing out of their comfort zone and in turn encouraging their students to take similar risks. The payoff for such risk-taking is that more of our human potential is activated as we continue to learn how to learn. And with that, I am going to stop, and I'm happy to take your questions. I have some references.